This is Green Tide Rising, a podcast following Latin America's green wave abortion rights movement,
and how it's unveiling a blueprint for global reproductive freedom.
I'm Monica Morales Garcia.
And I'm Asha Dyer. Last week, we saw how gender stereotypes play an outsized role not only in cultural narratives around women across Latin America and the Caribbean, but also in legal cases related to abortion criminalization charges. This week, we speak to the feminist lawyers that made it possible for Colombia to go from having only 3 exceptions where abortion might be permitted to having one of the most progressive abortion policies in the world.
This is Green Tide Rising. Don't go anywhere.
It was 2005. At that time, Colombia had a total ban on abortion, not even to save the life of a pregnant woman was permitted. It was a crime.
La vida es sagrada. Para pedirle a los legisladores, para pedirle a los políticos, a aquellos que tienen en sus manos la legislación, que no podemos permitir la despenalización del aborto.
In 2006, the first historic case about abortion in Colombia was filed before the Constitutional Court. I was in my 3rd year in law school.
This is Mariana Ardila. We're beginning this story while she's in law school. But you should know that for the past decade, Mariana has been fighting for reproductive rights and has litigated abortion cases all over the world.
This case was filed asking to legalize abortion on grounds that were really innovative at that time because it was using international human rights laws, treaties, constitutional law arguments, also the medical perspective.
The 2006 case was filed in the Constitutional Court of Colombia by the group Women's Link Worldwide. It's an intersectional feminist, anti-racist, anti-ableist, and anti-colonial human rights organization.
En Women's Link seguiremos luchando por la justicia reproductiva hasta que cada mujer, cada niña y persona con capacidad de gestar tenga garantizados sus derechos.
They employ legal, communication, and alliance strategies to advance the rights of women, girls, and gender-diverse people. In this particular case, activists didn't ask for abortion to be legalized. What they wanted was to see a liberalization of the law, to make it permissible in extreme cases. And the anti-abortion groups countered with a petition signed by 2 million people, urging the court to maintain the existing law.
The case finally, it was the decision C-355 of 2006. It said that criminalizing abortion was okay with the Constitution, but in extreme cases,
those being in cases of rape, incest, and if the pregnant person's life is at risk.
And then when there was an incompatibility with the fetus. So after the decision, strengthen that legal framework. And behind those cases, of course, it was the movements and the lawyers doing strategic litigation and advocacy to set those bricks that lead to what we have today. So for me as a student was I want to be like these great lawyers who are fighting for us at the court. And I didn't know Carolina at that time. And later I learned she was supporting the communications strategy of that 2006 case that was filed by Women's Link with support of the broader reproductive rights movement in Colombia.
At that time, really, I was a journalist. I work as a journalist. My name is Carolina Dueñas.
This is Carolina Dueñas. For 9 years, Carolina ran the communications strategy at Women's Link. But back in around 2005 and 2006, when the abortion rights movement was pressing to get the 3 exceptions, Carolina was working at a communications firm. It was one of the many agencies that was doing work to change the discourse around abortion in Colombia.
I remember when the process started 2005, there was no a story. Brújula Comunicaciones, they need a story, but was a taboo to talk about abortion. For example, the only fonts of information are the church and the doctors. But with the process appear a lot of voices supporting the need of decriminalize abortion. But when the process starts, appear a woman in a city in Colombia that need an abortion because she had cancer, and she raised her hand and say, yeah, this process applies for me.
Her name was Martha Gonzalez. Unexpectedly in 2005, she found out she was pregnant. Along with that news, she also learned that she had cervical cancer. Martha asked her healthcare provider to terminate her pregnancy so she could begin chemotherapy. But her doctor was scared. Abortion was still illegal at the time. So Martha was denied life-saving treatment. When Martha gave birth to her fourth daughter, the cancer had metastasized. And the 2006 ruling came too late. Martha died June 11, 2007. This is Green Tide Rising. Stay with us.
Welcome to episode 4 of Green Tide Rising. Monica, you know what? I am very excited about this episode today because whenever I think back to what happened in 2022 in the United States, Roe v. Wade being overturned in the Dobbs Supreme Court decision, that same year, a court decision in Colombia enabled the country to become home to one of the most progressive abortion policies in the world.
And against the backdrop of what was happening here, it's just another reminder of how the green wave was gathering momentum and leading the way on abortion rights.
But of course, this change didn't happen overnight. It was a long game. And not only are we going to hear more about this from Mariana and Carolina, but at the end of this episode, we'll also be hearing from our friend and who I like to call our green wave whisperer, Ximena Casas, who will be drawing from her current research project tracking the impact of abortion criminalization across Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as her experience as a feminist lawyer who also happens to be from Colombia. She's going to give us more insight as to what made Colombia's strategy so successful in the lead up to 2022.
We need to think out of the box when we are thinking in advocating for reproductive rights and for abortion rights. In the US, it's only about the right to privacy. My body, my choice. It's only about that. And I think sometimes that could be hard to connect with people when you are not seeing how not having access to this essential reproductive health care service could affect other aspects of your life and your family and your community. And I think this is a big lesson that we have in Latin America.
Before we hear more from Ximena later in the episode, let's get back into the story with Mariana and Carolina.
And then we understand the importance of the stories. Not only that time, but stories are crucial for change and shift minds of people. So I think it starts like a spreading the voices about abortion. But in the process, people start thinking that the abortion was a topic of social justice and equity. It was the push that Brújula tried to do with the communications strategy. Yeah, it's not a pecado, it's not a sin. It's a health service that women and pregnant people need in some points of their life. So it was like a little change of a conversation at the time. And we were working for a long time to try to shift the conversation.
So it's 2006 Colombia, and Carolina and others in the movement are pushing to change abortion discourse. And it worked. The Colombian Constitutional Court made it so abortion, though still criminalized, there were 3 really important exceptions. Exceptions that could have helped someone like Martha Gonzalez, who we heard about earlier.
And meanwhile, in the US, Roe v. Wade had been law of the land for over 3 decades. And in January of 2006, it was celebrating its 33rd anniversary. But thousands of anti-choice demonstrators joined the March for Life in Washington, D.C. They marched up Constitutional Avenue, past the US Capitol, And during their march, then-President George W. Bush cheered on the anti-abortion marchers, describing their pursuit as noble. He said that the anti-abortion cause appeals to the American consciousness, that it was rooted in American principles. And he said that the cause would prevail. Oof, he was a fortune teller.
You believe, as I do, that every human life has value, especially unborn children. By changing laws, we can change our culture. We're working to persuade more of our fellow Americans of the rightness of our cause. And this is a cause that appeals to the conscience of our citizens and is rooted in America's deepest principle. And history tells us that with such a cause, we will prevail.
Conveniently, former President Bush did not mention the contentious role abortion played in the debate over his nomination of Justice Samuel Alito just months earlier.
The nomination of Judge Samuel A. Alito, Jr. as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Conservative Justice Alito would later play a key role in the dismantling of Roe. So, as that was happening in the U.S., Sam Alito, beginning his lifetime term at the Supreme Court,
I had the honor this term of writing, I think, the only Supreme Court decision in the history of that institution that has been lambasted by a whole string of foreign leaders.
At the same time, Carolina continues her work at Brújula Communications for over 6 years, and Mariana graduates law school and begins working throughout Colombia. And then in 2014, after doing so much work separately, Mariana and Carolina finally meet.
2014, I think, we start working as Women's Link officially in the case.
Yeah, we started working in Women's Link almost at the same time.
Yeah.
Here is Mariana again, describing more about that moment.
I entered the organization as a senior attorney with a specific focus on reproductive rights. So Carolina and I met, and there I started learning a lot about communications, because as a lawyer, you don't know sometimes how to speak to make yourself understand to people that is not a lawyer. So from Carolina, I learned a lot about that, how to do like effective advocacy for abortion. It's different if, for example, you are fighting or advocating to end violence against women. When you come to talk about reproductive rights and decriminalizing abortion, you may face some backlash or some pushback from the audience. So it was really interesting to learn about how to do that. And we worked together in many of those cases that were between the 2006 decision and the 2022 decision.
In the years leading up to 2022, Carolina and Mariana worked together on so many cases that would ultimately lead them to decriminalizing abortion. But it took time. And it wasn't always like the big protests we see now, with green bandanas flying everywhere. But year by year, they were able to see a difference.
The first stage of the process at 2006, 5 and 6, the movement was supporting the process, but the number of people in the streets fighting for abortion was small.
It was like 25, 30 people like protesting before the court.
But in 2020, there was a lot of people in the streets in front of the court, moving los pañuelos verdes. And you see the difference in the process.
And one day, they got a call from La Mesa por la Salud. It translates to the Round Table for Women's Health, but everyone just calls it La Mesa, or just Mesa.
The Causta Justa movement, it was started by La Mesa por la Vida y la Salud de las Mujeres.
Causta Justa is a movement in Colombia fighting for the reproductive freedom and autonomy of all women over their bodies and life. The collective includes organizations, activists, feminists, grassroots organizers, international organizations, health providers, scholars, experts, and research centers throughout the country. Monica, it's a who's who of Latinas and badass folks on the March for Liberation.
Ow! La Mesa called Women's Link to say, okay, let's think about going a step further from having the 3 exceptions to a total elimination of the crime. So we start thinking about how to achieve that, how to do it. So we spent, I think, many months, I think from February to September 2020, like writing the brief. So I remember that we had that first meeting where we say, okay, this will be the arguments. You write this, you focus on this. And then, we will see each other in, 2 weeks to see how we go with the writing. And there was like that weekend, it was, no, everybody is in lockdown. So we continue through Zoom, writing and debating and reviewing and those arguments, and we filed in September of 2020. Still no vaccines, still with restrictions. So we were like a little group before the court with our mask on, filing the case,
and a big handkerchief.
And a big handkerchief. Yeah.
Now faced with an unprecedented pandemic, Mariana and Carolina have to figure out how to adapt their strategy. Here is Carolina again.
It was a challenge, but Mariana, it's amazing. And she said, no, the cases at that time in the middle of the pandemic are showing us that we need this shift too. Because at that time, women are not accessing to abortion, even if they have the legal avenue to do it. And the barriers, the obstacle at that moment were like the push for us to say, okay, yeah, this is the moment. We need to present this right now.
So it was like using different avenues and different strategies to appeal to journalists, to opinion leaders, to lawyers, to young women, to doctors, to people with a religion. So having those techniques through social media, it started to appeal to more and more people, young women especially. We even did a reggaeton and danced before the court to ask for decriminalization of abortion.
So an important thing about Colombia. In this country, lawyers don't need a client to challenge the law. This means you can challenge the court in abstract. So after La Mesa got in touch with Women's Link, 3 other organizations joined them in the fight. Here's Mariana again to explain a little bit more.
So we decided to go through that avenue to say the law, the criminal code, the code is against our constitution. And we're the plaintiffs of that lawsuit, Women's Link, La Mesa por la Vida, the Center for Reproductive Rights, Católicas por el Derecho a Decidir Colombia, and the Doctors for Choice also. And we decided to change the law, and we said, okay, we have the 3 grounds since 2006, but there are a lot of barriers for especially vulnerable women and girls, migrant women, indigenous women, Afro-Colombian women, women living in conflict-affected areas, poor women that are not having access to the services, even if they are in the 3 exceptions. So the right that the court promised us in 2006 was not a reality for everyone, and that breaches the right to equality. And also we use an argument about how the use of the criminal law has to be the last resort, not the first resort. And the state or the government has been dealing with abortions only through the use of criminal law and not using social policies or supporting women that are in conflict with their pregnancies through other forms. Just the forced motherhood or the jail, and that's it. No more. There are no more options. And we make a big argument about how international law has progressed since the 2006 case and how the court should reopen the discussion because so much has happened regarding reproductive rights. And as we were in front of the court, like every week, you saw more people and more people and more people. And as the court delayed the process, more people were coming. So it was amazing also to see how the movement grew and in the streets.
After all of that work, filing briefs, making arguments to the Colombian Constitutional Court, Carolina and Mariana and everyone else in Colombia, they were waiting for the ruling. They had just filed the case back in September of 2020. But the process was unusually long.
Regularly, these cases last like a year or less. But here we were in the beginning in 2022 and no decision made yet.
And there were points while they were waiting that made them doubt in all of their hard work. Like on June 24th, when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision.
It was pretty concerning to us because at that time, the decision in Colombia hadn't been made. We were waiting for it. And of course, because of colonialism and what the United States impact on other countries, and especially in Latin America and in Colombia, and the Supreme Court of the United States is a well-regarded court. So we'd say, oh my God, this is going to be a bad precedent for judges here. But at that time, it was interesting because just before we filed, we had the progress in Argentina. And then months before the Constitutional Court of Colombia made the decision, the Supreme Court of Mexico handed that a decision. And the Constitutional Court of Ecuador also around that time made also a decision. So we were like, okay, let's not look only to the United States because you have pretty good courts in Latin America, such as the Mexican court, such as the Constitutional Court of Ecuador. And we are making progress because international treaties of human rights that bind us, you should make this change. And fortunately, the Constitutional Court of Colombia didn't listen to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Carolina and Mariana made history. The 5-4 ruling of Colombia's Constitutional Court delivered a major victory for reproductive rights by decriminalizing abortion on all grounds up to 24 weeks of pregnancy.
Yeah, it was amazing, and a lot of young women were there and they were like, yes, we did it. They were hugging and dancing and celebrating, and yeah, it was amazing.
The landmark ruling put Colombia at the forefront of women's reproductive rights in Latin America and the world. And while Mariana was there, with tears in her eyes, where was Carolina?
I couldn't attend this day because I had COVID at the time. So I celebrate at home, crying a lot because of the victory. I was alone at home, and my kids say, "Mommy, why are you crying?" But yeah, it was an incredible moment. So it was amazing. But I can see, for example, a lot in the social media, the reactions of young women and young people celebrating, shouting for this victory. So seeing a lot of people celebrating, it was an incredible moment for us.
But Mariana and Carolina knew that though they just won a major victory, the fight is about making abortion access a reality. Here is Mariana once again.
So there is a fight for actual implementation of the decision, but also what we want is that criminal law is out of the question. So for sure, the movement is going to keep pushing until that is a reality. Also, it was very difficult for the movement in Colombia to maintain a case for almost 2 years, maintain the energy, the cohesion, the creativity, maintain the public opinion, the media attention that is very short in a country where every day there is a crisis and something to talk about. But we turn that delay, let's say, in a case to say, okay, we have more time to convince more people. The more the case lasts, we will take advantage of each hour and each minute and each week that we are here for bringing more people on board. And there we saw like more people in front of the court, more people writing opinion columns, more politicians saying, okay, this is something that we should do. So you have to flip that arepa. You have to flip and say, okay, we have to not lose creativity and not lose energy.
But in the same line that Mariana, having children is not only a decision about the pregnancy. Having children is a decision for your life. So you have to, you need the opportunity to decide if you want or not to have it, because it's a big responsibility. And even in an ideal world when you have, for example, full access to contraception, full access to education and information, you need an abortion in some point of your life. So the abortion needs to be available for everyone who needs it.
I think seeing others fighting and succeed, it makes you realize that it is possible. That really uniting about our rights and fighting for them, it paves the way to better lives. We can dream and achieve things together, and having a symbol, a color, a handkerchief that creates that sense of community. Even if you personally don't know the woman having the handkerchief next to you, you see and okay, we have something in common.
In communications, it's a symbol. We finally found a symbol to talk about abortion without words. It was like important for us, and I remember when at the first stage of this process, we were fighting every time with how can you show abortion without the pregnant women? How do you show you are supporting without this kind of images? So this is an image that when you see it, you see this person on my side. So it's a big symbol, and people are with you without words. In the difficult moments, always are organizations and people willing to support the access for women. In the United States, there are a lot of organizations working and fighting for the access. And in Mexico, people willing to provide the service to those women and people who needed an abortion. So there is a community, there is a network, and there is a way.
There's so much hope and motivation, I feel, after listening to the way Mariana, Carolina, and everyone involved in the Causta Justa movement work together for progress on abortion rights.
It really is so inspiring, and there are some key things about this story we should be paying attention to, especially as we look ahead to our presidential election and beyond.
Yep, you can say that again. So here is our friend Ximena Casas. Oh, are we going to say it again?
Yeah, it really is inspiring.
So here is our friend Ximena Casas to help us understand what made Colombia's strategy so effective and successful despite the barriers and setbacks, and the lessons we could potentially implement in the US. Ximena, can you tell us one of the key strategies that enabled Colombia's legal success and what Latin America is doing differently to the US?
I think for many, many years, we look at the U.S. as a reference and we look Roe as a groundbreaking legal decision that inform our strategies. But I think one big difference that I have seen with the fight in Latin America compared with the US is that in Latin America we have faced our arguments on human rights. We are talking about how the lack of access to reproductive health, including abortion, also put in danger other human rights, like the right to life, like the right to privacy, like the right to health, the non-discrimination. Even it could create a violation to the right to be free of torture, which is very different of how the abortion fight has focused in the U.S.
Okay, so what happens when the law's been changed? Is that the end of the fight? Can Colombia just pack it up and go home?
Changing laws is a critical first step and provides an important protective structure that makes service legal, safe, and accessible. But it is not the end of the road. After we change the law, there is always a lot of work to do after that because we still have stereotypes, stigma, and discrimination that needs to be addressed and removed as we see it as barrier to access the healthcare service that women and girls will need. So we must always be vigilant on our victories and make sure that each legal victory is joined by a social mobilization.
Colombia was able to win a legal decriminalization of abortion, which is huge. But there is something else that needs to accompany this, social decriminalization. Ximena, can you explain exactly what that is?
When we are talking about the social decriminalization, means that we need to engage the public, the society. And we need that these conversations go to our dinner tables with the families and with the friends, that we start understanding why we need to be talking about abortion and that it should not be a stigma or we shouldn't feel shame to be talking about these issues. Working on this social cultural transformation is a far-reaching struggle that does not happen one day to another. It requires a constant work and a lot of funding despite the legal advances. This social cultural transformation is key to guarantee the agency of our bodies and to win the battle for reproductive autonomy.
So why is it important not just to make abortion legal up to an arbitrary number of weeks, but to completely decriminalize the procedure?
In the last 30 years, more than 60 countries have decriminalized abortion in accordance with human rights standards. So I know the US looks like, many of us are moving backwards. Yes, there are some countries like the US, Poland, Italy, that are trying to move backwards. But there are more countries that are trying to move forward in respect of these international human rights standards. And actually, we are seeing that now is a new model to assure and guarantee this access. What we are seeing is this new decriminalization model that has been recommended by the World Health Organization. After we are seeing that the successful in countries as Canada or New Zealand or some cities in Australia, and actually the state of New York that has eliminated the crime of abortion from the penal code and recognized that abortion is an essential healthcare service and needs to be regulated only through the health regulations. And as a result, what we are seeing with these policies is that more than 90% of abortions have been performed in the first trimester trimester of the pregnancy, and generally with the use of misoprostol. And we are seeing that maternal deaths have also been reduced. In the Australia capital, for example, we have seen that this model, since came into effect in 2003, there have been no maternal deaths due abortion since then.
I love this notion of the green wave not just being a fight about legal wins, but centering the mobilization of everyday people and the power we all have. The notion of social decriminalization is so cool. And it is a reminder for us here in the US that if we do want to follow the trend of nations who are progressing on abortion rights, change really can begin at our kitchen tables or in our Instagram DMs. My point is, let's keep this conversation going. Make sure you tune in next time on Green Tide Rising. This episode was produced and written by Monica Morales Garcia.
Special thanks to Ximena Casas.
Green Tide Rising is executive produced by Jess Jacobs and Leela Meadow-Connor, with associate producer Adi Biaringer.
And produced in partnership with Pod People.
Our theme music was composed by Andres Aspiri.
I'm your host, Monica Morales Garcia.
And I'm your host and executive producer, Asha Dyer.
Join us again on Green Tide Rising. And in the meantime, head over to our YouTube channel to watch and share our accompanying video series, Entonces, link in the show notes.
You can also find us on social media and see more about this episode on our website, greentiderising.com. Subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcasts. Bye for now.
Adios.